right, we're still on. Thank you for staying. It's such a like personal film, and so much about like culture. And how did you find the women who were the filmmakers and who interviewed their families and communities? Could you talk about that first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the idea for this film really came from the two young women, Shinlan and An-Chi. They were actually other students in a class that I was teaching in Taiwan. It's the only department of communication focused on indigenous language and communication, so it's very special. It's located in the east coast of Taiwan, which is the home to about a quarter of Taiwan's indigenous peoples. Yeah. So I've noticed as I was teaching there for a couple of years, they were really interested in language loss. In fact, they were kind of sort of like on the precipice in this kind of crisis, seeing like that they can't speak it, and if they have children, how are they gonna learn it? So they really saw language loss right there. Like, so I was like, is this something you'd be interested in making a movie about? And so the women, the two women, An-Chi Chen raised their hand. They're like, yeah. And I was like, making a movie is not easy. So, you know, I really need you to commit to this. They're like, yes, yes, yes. And then all the other students are like, you're gonna come to my village, film me in my village. So that was how it came about. Yeah. And then the women in Hawaii I met through Anita. So Anita is who had passed away, yeah, in 2013. I think that was the year. Yeah, she's the first Maori woman filmmaker, and she was teaching at University of Hawaii at the time. So we both were kind of teaching filmmaking at these kinds of very specific departments focused on indigenous cinemas. And we talked, and she goes, I have a student. She comes every now and then to night class, but I'll tell you, most of my students in the indigenous cinema class are non-indigenous. So, but there is this one named Malia. So I met Malia, and then we started to talk about this project, and she's like, why don't we make it all women? Because there's so few indigenous women filmmakers. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this would be great. And it would change the dynamic of the discussion and just hanging out and workshops. And yeah, and she was really cool because she learned Hawaiian on her own. Yeah, so all of her family did not speak it because of the US government suppression of the language. Yeah, it was pretty intense. So yeah, so she learned it on her own, and she was like, well, let me find a couple of women at different levels, you know, and she didn't want to influence them at all, and she was like, you know, this is your experience, and you know, yeah, so that's how it came out. Yeah.
Any questions? Yes?
How did, like, so there's a lot of translation that went on, obviously. I know there's a few times that like the elder spoke and there wasn't any translation at all. Was there just no one to like translate, or like was that like a decision, or was it just a creative decision, or and then also as you're filming and stuff, like was it hard to find people to translate with all the different languages, especially when you guys were like in Hawaii and like.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah, it was a creative decision to not translate the Dao elder. Yeah, the Dao, who unfortunately is no longer with us. And there's another, if you remember, An-Chi interviewed her uncle, and he was like, it would be very sad if our language didn't pass on, especially for you, because you are An-Chi and you are, you know, Rukai, right? And he has also since passed, yeah. But the grandfather, Amaya, he was one of 10 speakers. So I really wanted people to just sit with the language, just listening to it, you know. And I think and also to simulate kind of what it was for us, because none of us spoke the language. He translated himself. Yeah, so that's what we were finding too, you know, that some of these individuals who are just a handful of speakers had to translate themselves. Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Can you talk about, oh, Claire, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that right now in San Francisco, there is a movement to save Cantonese. So
Yeah.
it's very, very similar to the indigenous language that, you know, being suppressed and then eventually it's disappearing. And so Cantonese used to be taught at City College, and I think they are, there's lack of enrollment, so they are cutting the course, and then there's only one class that's left. But then a lot of young people, suddenly they're waking up to the fact that it's going to be gone, and so they are actively, hopefully, to make a change. So for me, every Saturday I give a free Cantonese class, speaking class.
That's great.
Yeah, from 11 to 12. And just because suddenly there's this interest, which is very, very important. I think for a language to survive, you have to have people who are interested in learning it.
Yeah.
And then I find the other thing is that one of the ladies said that in order for it to survive, it also you have to be able to make money. You have to have economic sense. And I think actually it is very, very true, because, you know, people are just standing there taking pictures. Okay, it looked like, okay, what a tourist thing, but it's survival for the indigenous people. And that makes me feel that the arts itself, it's a very, very good way to make these disappearing language to survive, because you can do theater, you can do it in songs, and you can do it in dance, and that will bring in money. People would want to see it. And this is how these languages will survive ultimately, because they will die, because there are very few people who are learning them now.
Yeah.
But they can survive in the arts.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. It's too bad that my grad student and then her partner, who speaks Cantonese, but only with his parents. And he said he was really interested in this movie because he's trying to figure out, he's losing it, but he's trying to figure out how to keep it going too. And particularly since, and also even though she's Korean, she grew up in Hong Kong, so they're both going to Hong Kong next month.
Oh.
Yeah, to see their family, right? And but I think some of my other friends who are there talk about the suppression again of Cantonese.
Right.
And it's pretty big over there because of the broadcast media now that they basically try to stop all Cantonese language programming. But in the midst of that kind of intensity and intention to suppress, I think even my family at home, they still spoke it, right? But they also, I think nowadays, and just like here, I think in Taiwan, there's a resurgence of wanting to speak Taiwanese by young people. So Taiwanese is a better way to say it is like Hokkien. It's a kind of southern dialect, and that was my first language as well. And that one is very also critically endangered because the young people, they're not passing it. But once they're not passing it down, that's already considered critically endangered. Yeah. So I learned a lot. I worked with linguists on this movie, and it was just so fascinating. The way they talk about that, but you really see the activism coming from young people. I mean, I certainly saw that in Taiwan, and now that you mentioned that, in San Francisco, and then also in Hong Kong as well. And I know the young people in Taiwan. So I'm showing this movie again next month in Taiwan, actually in Pingdong, where An-Chi is from. So she's going to join me, and and Xinlan again. And it's always great, this movie, in terms of the time frame of it, where it's like, oh, 10 years later, we have a screening, we talk about it, and how have things been, how, like in terms of language and thinking about one's identity, where does one fit in their community, right? And how does, for example, Cantonese would become part of their life, like not just a, kind of.
Yeah, definitely. It like they
Yeah.
said, the language is the culture, and when you lose the
Yeah.
language, you lose that connection to your roots, to to your grandparents, to your great grandparents, to all the culture that came with it. It's gone, and it is actually pretty scary. And I think I think just because they need to control the society, but it's a very cruel thing to do, and actually, like An-Chi's mom said, it's the wrong thing to do, because that's not how you control people, because you have basically cut off their connection to their ancestors, and it's very cruel.
Yeah. And doing that to you, it's you think that then you can brainwash.
Yeah, and then you
that
create all
particular
these
group,
problems
that
in the
population.
society, because they suddenly they've lost their footing.
Yeah, including and so much more. And when we did that scene, interviewing Haoli's mother, and she just started to break down like that, we were like, oh my gosh, and then she said, was that identity that there was part of me that was lacking, and she kind of like, and it was through that language and the culture that wasn't there. There's always something there. So there's been a lot of movements around language revival that is connected to healing. Yeah, because there is so much contained in the language that is about, how I don't know how to explain it, but I mean, it's there's so much wisdom in certain kinds of language, and if you're multilingual, you appreciate that.
Yes.
Right? You know the
The
differences.
nuance.
You cannot say something in English that is what you know in
Exactly.
Taiwanese or
Yeah, you can't
You
translate
just
them.
cannot, yeah.
But that's where the culture is. That,
Right.
the
And then-
nuance.
And then that's a whole nother entry into another cosmology. It's like so cool that way. Yeah, different way of looking at the world. Yeah.
Could you talk about like the way at this point technology and the role of that to preserve these languages or cultures? I mean, even
Yeah.
the pros and cons.
I know, exactly. That's a good question, because, what was it that Ryan was using, that app? He's using an app right now to relearn Cantonese. I forgot. Drops. Drops. Yeah, it's called Drops. I don't know if you've heard of it. But yeah, there's also there's a new AI that just came out of Zuckerberg's. What's his new Meta? Yeah, the
Metaverse.
He just did one on Taiwanese language. Yeah, on translating through voice recognition. He's working with a Taiwanese engineer, so I just saw him on my Facebook feed, but. There are, and I think, again, it's the limits of what a computer can do, right? Unless it's this kind of crowdsourcing of ideas or words that people kind of, kind of like a Wikipedia, right? But I don't know. I mean, I think it helps in terms of visibility and giving it some kind of cultural capital in a way, like. That, oh, hey, there's your language that there are people working on, helping you learn through this particular app. So if anything, it brings some kind of value to that language. Yeah, just like when you look at Google Translate, you look at all the languages, and those that are like Marshallese is not on there. I'm making a movie right now with the Marshall Islands, but it's like it's not on there, and it's yeah. So there's that. That's on the downside.
Can you talk more about your current project that you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm working on it's a crazy movie idea, but it's about the history and rise of women heads of state. Yeah, women presidents, and we've interviewed a few former heads of state because they have time now to reflect on their experience. But the ones that are current, it's very difficult. Although we did get an interview with Hilda Heine, who was then the president of the Marshall Islands, and also any Pacific Island nation. So she's like the first, right? Yeah, so we got to visit the Marshall Islands and talk to her about some of her kind of philosophies on just life and governing and education and why she was interested in working in the government at a leadership level in the first place. Yeah, so one of the things, what's important for the Marshall Islands right now is in 2023, the compact of, what is it called, the Free Association, yeah, compact that, right? So the US has to decide if they want to continue that or not, or to just end it. But they want to continue it because there's still a lot of things the US is obligated to them because of the nuclear testing that they did. So they tested for basically 12 years, detonating a Hiroshima bomb every day for 12 years in the Marshall Islands. Yeah, and there's just huge rates of cancer, all kinds of issues because of the nuclear testing. That is not just one generation, it's 2 generations, 3 generations. And they also have a RUNET dome which covers all the radioactive waste that's kind of in this small coral atoll since the 70s that is leaking now. And the US needs to clean it up. It was meant to be temporary, they have done nothing, and they need to clean that up. So they can't do it themselves, and so 2023 is really important. So you know, I'm just doing little shorts right now, so but hopefully raising money, hopefully to make the longer work. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah. It's a really tough project, but so rewarding. So I'm just kind of continuing to just plug along because I feel like we just don't even hear about women presidents. So we just don't. Yeah, it's just not even out there, and you know, it's going to be looking at them comparatively, transnationally, looking at how they deal with superpower neighbors. You know, with the migration crisis, and particularly also how the countries led by women did really well on COVID. Just things like that, you know, like ways in which they tried to handle conflict and difference in their society, like in Ireland, and then dealing with, the nuclear issue, right? How does she gently nudge the U.S. to continue the compact of the association? Yeah, so it's just techniques of governance, that's all. I don't know, some people might think it's a little boring, but it's interesting to me. I guess if it's interesting to me, I'll just keep going at it.
That's right, that's right.
As a professor, as an educator, as a filmmaker, do you have any advice for young people, be they filmmakers, creative people, or just humans living today?
Yeah. I know, it's funny you asked that because I was just thinking about the other day how I used to tell young people that if you keep your needs, your material needs at a minimum, then you have more creative freedom. So basically, do you need a car? Do you need, a house? Do you need, like all these things, like, because if you do need all these things, then you need to find money to support yourself, right? And if that's the case, then you need to find a lot of money that might influence what you want to make. So either you keep your day job and then you make movies at the weekend. But I think in general to just definitely understand yourself, your passion, what it is you want to say, what motivates you, and and think about how much you're willing to compromise on your creative vision, because that'll influence the funding that you can get. You know, and for me, it's also really like it's such a collaborative process for me. So most of my movies have been collaborative, and that's the way I enjoy working. So just sharing ideas with each other and producing something, you know, together is really enjoyable for me. So that's kind of how what I would say is to find your community, find the people that you know you can work with. Yeah, and producing something that's probably most people are like, how the hell did you do that? Or what the hell, like, you know, why did you do that? And, you know, so, but that's only because you have so many great people that you're working with. Yeah. So, yeah. And we're in the Bay Area, it's absolutely incredible and amazing how much support we have here. Yeah, so it's like if I ever have a question about something, I know that I can go to, so, you know, like we were just talking about the directors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not only that, but all the folks that are involved in the entire process, from sound mixing to color grading, we all know each other. And sometimes we just barter labor. Yeah, so that was been really important in San Francisco, the Film Arts Foundation, which is no longer, but we now have BayBack, so Bay Area Media Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're a really great group too, but we all shared equipment because it was expensive at that time. Now people can, you know, make a movie maybe with their phone or something, you know, something that's a bit more easy access versus like a film camera, you know. But even then, HD was so expensive, so we'd buy one and then people would share it and use it, you know. It's a little different now, but yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. It was lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for this living room. It's nice. Yeah.
So nice
to
meeting
meet you.
I have to see you more often.
Yeah.
Can you give me your